But I would argue that good writers, good entrepreneurs, understand that, yes, a picture is sometimes worth 1,000 words. A picture is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes a metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures. A picture is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes a metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures. You are so profoundly less moved by that than I was when I came up with it, but that's all right. And I think there's a metaphor. If you think about all the sort of the things going on in this is about globalization. If you think about all the things going on in the global economy, if you think about all the things going on in labor markets around the world, I think there's a metaphor that helps us really clarify and understand what's going on in that space. And that metaphor is our brains. Our brains, as all of you know, are divided in half. You've got your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere. Now, no doubt you've heard about left brain and right brain over the years, and unfortunately, much of what you've heard is crap, garbage, rubbish. This is one of those ideas where the popularization of the idea has gotten way ahead of the science, way ahead of the science. The number of insipid, vacuous, just plain wrong things that have been written about left brain and right brain over the years is just phenomenal. But in the last several years, thanks to functional magnetic resonance imaging, some of the machines that Helen was talking about yesterday, we're actually able to look into our brains and get a little glimmer of how they work. At this point, it's pretty primitive. We don't, our brains are very complicated and very complex. But what we have discovered is that at a kind of topographical level, our brains are also very elegant and efficient. Over time, they've done this really nice job of dividing up tasks. They have different specialties. But actually, in my book, A Whole New Mind, to make sure that I got the science right, I'm the son of a scientist. I care about science. I wanted to make, if I'm going to use this metaphor, I wanted to make sure I got the underlying science right. So in this book, A Whole New Mind, I went to the National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C., U.S. National Institutes of Health in Washington, D.C., to get my own brain scanned, to see my own brain in action, which was so profoundly disappointing, I can't even describe it, but that's another story. And what we know about our brains is this. Our brains are very complicated. We use both sides of our brain for everything that we do. But at a broad topographical level, our brains are also very elegant and very efficient. Over time, they've done this spectacular job of dividing up tasks. They have different specialties. This side specializes in one set of tasks, tasks that are logical, linear, sequential, analytical. This side specializes in another set of tasks. Not better, not worse, not harder, not easier. It's just a different department. It specializes in tasks that are about processing things all at once rather than in sequence, tasks that are about synthesis rather than analysis, and tasks that are about understanding the context of a situation rather than the text. All right? And I think that division of labor in our brains yields a very powerful metaphor for understanding what's going on in economies, in labor markets, and businesses today. And here's how the metaphor works. It used to be that the most important abilities in any sort of endeavor, any kind of professional endeavor, were characteristic of the left hemisphere. The abilities that mattered most, the abilities that employers wanted, the abilities that individuals were incentivized to develop, were characteristic of the left hemisphere. The logical, linear, sequential, spreadsheet, zero in on the right answer abilities. And today, I really want to underscore this. Those kinds of abilities, those metaphoric left brain abilities, the logical, linear, sequential, analytical, step-by-step, zero in on the right answer abilities, are absolutely 100% necessary. Absolutely 100% necessary. Absolutely 100% necessary. But they're no longer sufficient. And now its abilities characteristic of this hemisphere of the brain. Again, it's a metaphor. Characteristic of this hemisphere of the brain. Artistry, empathy, inventiveness, big picture thinking. These kinds of abilities have become the ones that matter most. These kinds of abilities have become the first among equals. That's the punchline of what I wanted to say to you today. That's the claim that I'm making here. Now, if you offer up this claim, that we're moving from a world of labor markets built less on the logical linear capabilities and more on the artistic empathic capabilities, you often get a kind of bipolar response. Although looking at your facial expressions here late on a Friday afternoon, the response is decidedly more unipolar. If you say this to a group of artists and designers, they think it's pretty groovy. If you go to a group of engineers, if you go to, say, an engineering school, engineering university, I mean, I've learned this the hard way. Go to a American university engineering department and say, hey, guys, and it was mostly guys, hey, guys, we're moving from a world of logical linear reasoning to one of artistic empathic reasoning. The response among engineers is that they typically will begin text messaging each other. And when I finally had the gumption to see what they were text messaging, I realized they were all text messaging each other a single word. It is an 8-letter word, 2 syllables, begins with B, ends with T, not Buddhist. If you're in that category, all right, or you're text messaging right now, that's cool. I actually want you to be skeptical of this claim. But what I want you to understand is that this claim that I'm making here isn't wishful thinking, isn't how I want the world to be. It is an argument. And the argument produces very bad results for me. Because I myself am a very, 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 very left-brain guy. I'm very analytical. I'm the most sequential person you've ever met in your life. I'm a very quantitative person. I love numbers. I love data. In my hierarchy of loves, my greatest love in life are my wife and our 3 children. My second greatest love in life, and I wish I were joking about this, but I'm absolutely not, my second greatest love in life are charts and graphs. I love charts and graphs. In a kind of unhealthy way, I love charts and graphs. It's kind of how I see the world. But if you do what I've done over the last couple of years and taken this very hard-headed, analytic, left-brain look at the facts, at the evidence, at the data of what's really going on in organizations, in careers, in labor markets, I don't even think it's all that close that the scales are tilting. But I want to lay out this argument to you in the hopes that, given that we have a diverse group of people here, both in terms of nationality and in terms of function, that you can locate yourself in this context and draw some conclusions about what it means for you. So I'm going to make this argument to you. It's a logical, linear, sequential, cause and effect argument. All right? The effect is that the scales are tilting. These abilities, the metaphorical left brain abilities, still matter, but they matter less. And these abilities, the metaphorical right brain abilities, are the ones that matter most. And that's the effect. And there are 3 causes. 3 causes. They are abundance, Asia, and automation. Abundance, Asia, automation. Let's start with abundance because I think it's the most important in business terms. I think it's the least heralded. I think it basically, in some ways, goes completely unremarked upon, even though it's transforming all kinds of businesses, all kinds of careers. And the reason for that has to do with certain kinds of biases. Biases in our brain, biases in our media. What gets a huge amount of attention, both in terms of how we react as individual species, but also in terms of how our institutions react, is bad news that happens fast. Bad news that happens fast gets a huge amount of attention. What gets no attention at all, but is ultimately, in this case, more important, is good news that happens slowly. Good news that happens slowly gets no attention at all. And abundance is a case of good news happening slowly. What I mean by abundance is that the standard of living among middle-class people, deep into the middle class, in many countries in the world, not everywhere, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in much of the EU, in Japan, in Australia, the standard of living among middle-class people is breathtaking by historic standards, breathtaking by international standards. If you look at the standard, your own standard of living, and you contrast that with your grandparents' standard of living, the difference is staggering. Your lives in some fashion, in material terms, would be almost unrecognizable to your grandparents. I think about my grandparents, all of whom were born in the first few years of last century. If you were to take them when they were my age, when they were in their mid-40s, transport them through time to the median family in Newcastle, or the median family in Columbus, Ohio, or the median family in Tokyo, they would be amazed at how that family lives. That family probably owns its own home. That family's probably been on airplanes. That family probably has decent health care. If you look at that family's medicine cabinet, they have an array of medicines that weren't even contemplated back then. Look at that family's mobile phone, which we'll get to more in a moment. As we learned yesterday from Ray Kurzweil, that mobile phone basically has more computing power than existed when my grandparents were my age.